In 2004, Mazda's MX-5 was well into its second generation. The company had been pioneering the two-seater sports car market since 1989. But the story of today's car starts in 1999, because this is the MAZDASPEED MX-5. This car comes from Valera Keller, who loves the Speed MX-5, mainly just because of the aesthetics of it. I've never driven one, but I can just imagine how good the Mazda Speed version feels to drive, with that juiced up 1.8 litre motor in there. Just personally think it's one of the nicest looking cars ever produced, and the fact that they gave the Mazda Speed line some massive alloys and a turbocharger just makes it seem like it would be a thrill to own. Probably not as a daily though, I can't lie. So, very quickly, who is Mazda Speed? Well, they're Mazda's performance branch. They started at Mazda Auto, a Mazda dealer in Tokyo, and they love the cars so much they wanted to take them racing around the world. Mazda said, maybe you and I could partner up, and they went racing, and they won dozens of races. But in 1999, Mazda went all in and acquired Mazda Speed, making them the brand's official performance branch. The car of today's video is their second creation after the Mazda Speed Protege, which looks weirdly like a version 6 WRX STI. But anyway, to this day, this is the only MX-5 that Mazda Speed have got their hands on. This isn't a Civic Type R, this isn't a Golf GTI, this wasn't a regular thing. This car was and has been a one-off. So what did they do to the MX-5? After all, it's not like the car and its predecessor hadn't become cult classics since their inception and aren't well-rounded cars. Well, they turbocharged it. The Mazda Speed MX-5 had 8.5 psi boost and had an air-to-air intercooler. It carried over the car's stock 1.8 litre four-cylinder engine. However, this time it produced 178 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 166 pound-feet of torque at 4,500 RPM. That is 25% more power and 33% more torque respectively. There were various modifications to account for the extra power thanks to the turbo, such as a new oil line, a cooling system that had a much larger radiator, and modified pistons, which could account for the extra fuel-air mixture. So what did this thing sound like when it all came together? Well, I'll let you listen. I usually have a lot to say about the sound of a car engine, but I have surprisingly little to say about this one. It sounds as you would expect. It's got the fun little roaring purr of an MX-5, but more souped up. It sounds as you would expect, really, and that's a good thing, because the NM MX-5 sounds great. I mean, a four-cylinder that sounds like that is brilliant. Beyond the engine, the car had a 6-speed manual transmission, giving it one extra gear over the standard model. It had a heavier clutch pressure plate, and there were also modifications made to the drive shaft and differential. The valve timing head was also changed. It was replaced with a fixed timing unit. This was done to ensure maximum drivability throughout a greater variety of rev ranges, as well as ensure the longevity of the turbocharger. 2 additional cooler plate pieces were also fitted. This was to make sure that the oil had more time to circulate before it was recycled through the engine, so it could have more time to cool. To account for increased fluctuation in temperature causing wear and tear under the bonnet, new harder rubber was used around the engine and differential mountings. The gear stick also had significantly less travel, and the suspension had much shorter springs with much higher spring rates. Dampers, provided by Blistein, were tuned by Mazda Speed to suit their purposes with this souped-up MX-5. There were also moves to increase the rigidity of the chassis and road holding capability, This included adding larger front and rear stabilizer bars, as well as the introduction of a front strut tower base, and the car came wearing Toyo Proxys R28 tyres. There were also some cool design revisions, such as a larger exhaust tip, sports smoked headlights, and a cool little underspoiler. Moving along to the interior, the car had black bucket leather seats, a leather draped gear stick and handbrake, silver instrument panel gauges, and stainless steel scuff plates. And of course, the entire car was just dunked in Mazda Speed badging, just in case if you forgot what car you were driving. There were also a couple of other cool nifty things, such as a 6-speaker Bose sound system and a 6-disc CD system. So what did all of these changes turn the Mazda Speed MX-5 into? Well, it meant that there was no real sane way to drive this car. It couldn't be driven like a normal Mazda MX-5, which is notable for its laid-back attitude to sports fun. This car was too altered in its body control and its dynamics. It was significantly more disciplined in what it was wanting to do. It drives like a Pomeranian who had been fed a can of Monster Energy in a way, because it had even more power for an already pretty powerful car because of its tiny size and curb weight, which meant it could just go. Oh, that was a terrible click. Oh, that was better. It could just go. And with this extra power, it just meant that it just had more of that. And because of the change in dynamics and the change in its body control, it was a much more reserved yet more powerful entity. The dampers and suspension made for a significantly rougher ride that people weren't and still aren't used to in an MX-5. The car really had to be pushed to make proper use of. The car had pinpoint steering, comparatively at least, compared to the more roly-poly MX-5 of now and then. The characteristics of the car were much more emphasized by the heavier clutch, shorter gear stick, and shorter gear ratios. Speaking of gearing though, I haven't driven one of these cars, but apparently gear changing in this feels incredible. So yeah, props to Mazda Speed for creating a nice feeling gear stick. But anyway, all of these things came together to give the car extremely different driving dynamics, which made some of the drivers of MX-5s feel quite alienated when getting behind the wheel of this one. Because it looked like an MX-5, it was made by Mazda's people, but it felt and drove too differently for it to really feel like it was the same sort of thing. It's sporty fun, but this car takes what people love for the fun of an MX-5 and replace it with a very stiff and disciplined and metaphorically as well as literally rigid character. It's actually worth noting that a lot of the people who worked on the 1989 MX-5, the first one, actually worked on the Mazda Speed MX-5. So they clearly knew exactly what they were doing by changing the characteristics of this car so much. Not to say that this is a bad change, I must say. This car is fantastic to drive still. It's just quite different from what people had come to expect from the MX-5. And one could very much consider this car to be an OEM's crack at the tuner world. As we know, the MX-5 has so many fans in the car tuner space, but this has been the one and only time where Mazda have taken their own car and souped it up and done things to it. So, would you like to drive a Mazda Speed MX-5? Or do you prefer the more friendly and laid back and casual approach that Mazda have established with the MX-5 over its 30-year history? Let me know in the comments. Okay, bye.